the size of a boat.
Yes. Do you want some board or?
I'm okay.
I get afflicted with hay fever and it gets me in the throat, which is why I put out the All Points call for fruit pastels.
Richard, I've got some natural chewing gum if you want. That might
It
help.
might, possibly. I'll just keep a bit on there just in case. Who knows? Of course, the wise speaker. Oh, the wise
You
speaker.
like them?
Will I?
I think so.
Let's see.
I think so. I'm ever optimistic.
Is there anything special in them?
Very good for your mouth and teeth.
Just that.
They're natural.
Menthol. That's not menthol. Natural, yeah. There's a lot of things that are natural. Yeah. Anyway,
If your throat gets dry.
the wise speaker would have brought their own, remember to have brought their own throat pastels, wouldn't they? And they did, but then they left them in their Airbnb. So, what can you do? We haven't started yet, by the way.
So everybody
Maybe
can
we have,
relax.
who can tell? Phones off? Phones off, that's a good idea, isn't it? You want to start, or should I?
I never want to start.
I'll rephrase the question. Will you start or shall I?
You shall.
I shall, okay. I don't mind. So there's no self. That's it, really. Whatever's talked about this afternoon from here, whatever questions, comments, arguments, answers, disagreements, whatever happens, it all comes back to that, really. That's all we're here talking about. There's no self. Another way of, well, it's a way of glossing the word non-duality. Most of us, our everyday experience is of duality, which basically just means there's two things. There's us, in other words, a self, and there's an external world which we move through, and that external world is full of other selves that we come up against. Sometimes, you know, pleasant ways, sometimes in a not such a pleasant way. But that's the kind of everyday experience that most of us take for granted. You know, I mean, the word non-duality, not two, is kind of a bit strange, because I mean, obviously there's lots more than two things. It's not like there's only two things. There's more than two things in this room. But what non-duality is pointing at is, you know, it's a comment on the common experience, which is duality, which is of two things. There's me and then there's everything else. And the experience of me is radically different to the experience of everything else, we could say, because the experience of me is, or I feel like I'd rather say seems to be, direct. And in a rather obvious way, the experience of everything and everyone else is indirect. So, in a way, you could say the natural experience seems to be a duality. I exist in an external world that I move through. But the suggestion in here is that actually the natural state is of seeing through that, seeing that there's only non-duality, that if you like, I and the external world are one, at which point the very terms I and the external world kind of lose their, certainly their everyday meaning, their conversational meaning. So the everyday experience may be that I move through this, so there's space that I move through, and I move through this, let's say, let's bring another element in with a personal history, so I move through this which is space, and I also move through this which is time, because I move through this space, meeting other me's, with a sense of having come from somewhere in the past, and moving towards somewhere in the future. So there's all these dimensions. You know, there's space, there's time, there's the sense of me, and that's what makes separation. And all we're talking about is the possibility of, rather than saying seeing through that, because nobody sees through that, what I'd rather say is all we're here to talk about this afternoon, we'll thrash around and questions and comments and arguments or whatever happens, is the possibility of seeing through that. That there isn't actually a separate person, a separate self, with a personal history who's come from the past and is moving towards the future. That is a kind of, I don't know why this word's popped into my head, but a kind of glorious illusion. And whenever I use the word illusion in a talk, or when I'm writing, I always gloss it, because it's so often misunderstood. So when I say it's a kind of glorious illusion, I don't mean it simply doesn't exist, which is what is simply unreal, which is what the word illusion is often taken for. I mean that it's something other than what it appears to be, which is what the word illusion really means. So we could say there's an illusory self that moves through what appears to be an external world of space and time. And all we're here to talk about is the possibility of that collapsing. And then there may or may not be, because there are no rules about that, then there may be a wow. There may be a wow. The realisation that this, that thought, that it had a biography, a personal history, a past consisting of however many years, about 37 in my case, or whatever it might be, a future for how long, that all of that is just a kind of glorious, well, the other word that's used apart from illusion, the other word that's often used is dream. So sometimes people who speak and write about this call this a waking dream, which is certainly not quite the same as a nighttime dream. And we can maybe come on to that later if we want to, if we're interested in exploring that. So we could say, there's no self. Actually, there's no self. Actually, there's no time. Actually, there's no space. But in this appearance, in this dream, all of those things appear. Except in dreamless sleep. In dreamless sleep, none of those things appear. Do you want to take that?
Okay. And at the heart of all the full seeing of this is love, which is what brings an end to seeking and what brings joy and rest, and it can be physically seen as well as experienced. And so without that, I mean, the emptiness can be seen, and that can be quite cold, the emptiness of everything. So there's just nothing, no objects, no people, and everything appearing at the same time, so the nothing and the everything are one. And the essence of this is love. And how can it be seen? It can be seen in the stillness of everything. So this kind of, everything's revivified. It's kind of like, there's an intensity to this experience as well. It's not an experience, but it's like a very still energy as well. So it's, and it affects the perception. So everything is more alive, the aliveness of everything is seen, and there's radical acceptance of everything as well. So everything is seen as it appears, accepted as it is. It couldn't be any other way. So there's a tendency to sink into where you are, particularly during the honeymoon phase of this, once this has been seen. Because it's one thing that we humans find very difficult, is just to sit still, but that becomes actually a way of just really sinking into the oneness. So there's no sense of otherness, there's no sense of strangeness as well, all that kind of goes. So everywhere you go, it's experienced as being at home. So there's an at-homeness to this. And time is still experienced, time in the timeless. Initially it completely collapses, but you know, so time is within the timeless. It's not like life's experienced or seen differently, as in, you know, objects are seen the same way, everything appears the same way. But the actual experience of the physical, certainly in my case, is gone. There's no sense of any physicality here. There's awareness of feet in the ground and body on a chair. And the mind can also blow in this. The mind could be completely gone, and in that there really is just what's happening, what's happening, what's happening. Obviously, when the past is there, it appears in the mind. And the experience of that changes too. And the experience of time, even though it is experienced, it's not like I could sit in this chair for 5 hours and say, well, I don't know, I've been here for 3 minutes or something, do you know? It's still kind of known, so in that way it's quite ordinary. But yeah, you get, over time this becomes much more ordinary, so in a way it becomes more difficult to talk about it. But it is, there's a lot of changes that go with this as well, so you know, a lot of defences tend to drop away because the heart is much more opened and there's more availability. There's a sense of vulnerability, but it's actually, that vulnerability is strength, and it's seen as that. I don't know what else to add. But yeah, glimpses are really common now, so I imagine people sitting here probably had some experience of this. Yeah, so I think that's all I want to say, really. So
Let's see if there are questions, comments, discussion or not. Okay, in that case, so the floor's open.
So like when you can afford to be vulnerable because nothing is threatening you. It's just sheer safety or release of that fear.
yeah, it is. It's safe to be open, and it's seen as defences for what they were that weakness, that shying away.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're not.
It's positive rather than negative.
Yeah, with the love as well, it's just easy, isn't it? It's just natural. It's just everything's dropped in the moment, so there's no shame around emotions in that sense, and more access.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could speak a little about emotion, and because I'm wondering about our conditioning and our emotions that arise through conditioning, but also I don't know if I've heard it incorrectly or not, but something around that emotions happen but for no person, no me. And yet our conditioning, like if we have a thought, there's an emotion that goes with it and a sensation. That's what we understand from in a duality perspective. And is it the same when the me drops, or fades or disappears? That because I've heard the phrase emotions happen but for no person, and yet there's conditioning that seems to be that this package of a thought and an emotion and a sensation, that they come together and one can trigger the other. I don't know if my question is clear or not, but I'm just wondering what it's like from a non-dual.
Do you want to go first?
You want to, I was going to ask you that.
All right, I don't mind. I mean, some people say that the emotions run through them much quicker. I would experience that. I mean, you can put aside happening for no one. That's kind of neither here nor there, really. So, if you've still got patterns that are playing out, you may still not be in touch with certain emotions, like kind of like a normal response to a situation. If you do not recognise it, say you're in a situation where somebody's being really angry at you, you may not react to that at all just because that's your pattern. So it's not just the conditioning. If you don't know what the patterns are, you may not be reacting emotionally anyway. You may still be able to suppress your emotions, but emotions themselves are just felt the same way. For me, they're perhaps less intense. Most people, it's more intense after awakening. I think maybe because I was in quite a lot of suffering, so there was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, and that dropped away. So, and also I'm in a sort of healthier, safer environment than the one I was in. So I have more access to much more of my emotional range, say like that. But yeah, for some people, if all they can experience is anger, say if you're kind of narcissistic or something, they will probably never experience the full range of emotions, because that injury is created very, very early and tends to be very difficult to heal, if at all. So it's just the same. I mean, it's just the same. You have your emotional reactions. They probably don't linger as much. I tend to feel things, when I'm talking about something that's sad, I tend to feel sad when I'm talking about it. And when I stop, the feeling tends to stop as well. So it doesn't seem to hang around, which is good. Probably because the mind is not repeating the same scenarios over, from the past, the problematic past. So, yeah, in that sense, because a lot of people are stuck in something, aren't they? Trying to resolve something from the
Or have
past.
a natural reaction to a certain stimuli, but that seems to be that I just wondered about, is that part of the me package, or yeah, but I thank you, what you're saying is making sense here.
Also be more space. I mean, mentally, usually the mind is slowed down, if not, in some cases, completely stopped. And there's more space in a sense, so there's more metacognition where you can think before you react, or pause before you react. So there's more kind of responding, typically, than reacting, which is good, because our reactions could be kind of like, not so good, not serving us so well, I think,
Kind of similar to what she was saying, if there's like a reaction to something happening in a situation, is there an internal dialogue that might correct that? Say if you were driving and you were driving carelessly, or you were doing something at work that was just going a bit wrong. I mean, Because if I just rely on awareness to kind of fix that, it doesn't always work. If there has to be like a speedy reaction or something, so I have to tell myself to, calm down or whatever. Would that be the same?
You actually don't need the mind, in a sense, to reflect. Like, it's a funny thing when you're in a no-mind state, because it's almost like you've got access to you kind of know what to do, do you know, like, so you don't necessarily need to talk yourself through it, but some cases I would do, and some cases I wouldn't do. It would just naturally arise, and of course there's some cases where I would just react, and and sometimes that's a good thing too. So to be honest, the healthiest emotional people who are the most healthy emotionally that I've met aren't necessarily awake. So it's that can often get confused. It doesn't necessarily make you the most loving or the kindest, thoughtful, less reactive. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily follow either, so that can get confused. What do you think?
Well, I was going to come in and say, I make this distinction, quite a lot of people make this distinction between what's sometimes called neurotic and natural feelings. And the problem, there are two things about neurotic feelings that makes them highly problematic. One is because the kind of feeling is suppressed, it tends to hang around for longer. And so, for example, you might call an example of a natural feeling would be anger. Once anger becomes neurotic, it becomes something like irritation or annoyance. And irritation can go on forever, whereas anger tends to kind of flash up, go through, and it's gone. That's one problem. But the other problem that occurs with neurotic feelings that tends to keep us bound on a hamster wheel with it, as maybe everybody knows in this room, maybe not everybody knows in this room, is that neurotic feelings tend to attach very, very strongly to a story in the mind about them. So let's take irritation. A neurotic version of anger is irritation. A neurotic version of fear is anxiety. So anxiety attaches, you could say fear is a kind of automatic, natural body-mind response to something that's happened. Anxiety is kept going by this neurotic story that says, I'm anxious or fearful because blah, 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 blah about the future. The same thing with irritation or annoyance. One of the things that I sometimes say is that possibly everybody in this room knows somebody who has been annoyed or irritated for days, weeks, months, or in some cases even years. Some people manage to be, some apparent people manage to be, irritated all their lives, but you probably have never come across anybody who's been angry for days, weeks, months, or years because it's too bloody exhausting, or whatever. So it's the two differences, really. The neurotic feeling is suppressed, and it also goes with this perpetual damned hamster wheel of a story that I'm on. So what seems to happen, I always have to say what seems to happen. What seems to happen is that whatever this energy shift is, whatever this kind of release of some kind of bizarre energy is, I have no idea what that consists of. It often tends to release whatever it is which is holding the feelings in that neurotic form. So then after that, it's much more likely that instead of a week's irritation, there might just be a flash of anger. Instead of days of anxiety, there might just be fear, and then it's gone. So we could say it's kind of like a return to a sort of more natural state. But one thing I want to add, because, maybe it's important, maybe it isn't, is that if, like me, you've spent quite a lot of the apparent past entranced by spiritual paths and stories of gurus and enlightenment and all of the kind of magical things, often what goes with that is the kind of, I'm going to say assumption, but I think quite a lot of teachers, gurus, spiritual teachers, etc., kind of plant this in us quite consciously. In fact, I've been watching some YouTube recently where this was just definitely happening, that there is both achievable and desirable, a kind of magical state where no uncomfortable feelings can arise. And that is just it's a real trap. And so whenever I come across in the spiritual literature something that completely contradicts that, I just absolutely love it, because I think it is much needed. So usually I throw in at this point, you know, the only couple of quotes that comes to me, there was the Zen master, whose name I can't remember, who said, "No one knows sorrow like a Zen master." In other words, the more open we are, you know, the stronger these natural feelings may become. There was the Zen story of the Zen monk who asked the student, "Why do you want to become enlightened? How do you know you like it?" I really love that one. And then there was another great teacher, in inverted commas, who said, "Even in the greatest yogi, joy and sorrow still arise." And I've kind of been talking about this stuff for so long now, I kind of live in a bit of a bubble of this is what, you know, this is what's out there. And da, 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 da. So when I actually, you know, have a fit of insanity and switch on YouTube and start watching other speakers, I'm really surprised the extent to which, I don't know what to call it, spirituality, enlightenment, whatever it might be, you know, non-dual soul, is still being sold as a path to this wonderful, permanent, peaceful, whatever it is, you know, where no ripple of discomfort can arise. And all of, you know, to which I just want to kind of shout out bollocks to that. You do. Yeah.
I kind of understand that emotions happens when there is no person, but I don't get is who is the one who is noticing the emotions happening?
No one. No one.
No one.
No one is noticing it. I mean, that's really the kind of heart of what we're talking about here. No one is making a gesture here. No one is speaking. No one is noticing that they feel anxious or angry or happy or peaceful. That's what is at the heart of what we're talking about here. All of that is just arising.
Which sounds more mysterious than it is.
Yeah.
So actually it's
Yeah.
just the same, really.
Yeah, I mean, the clue to that, it sounds more mysterious than it is in the statement, this is the natural state. You know, there's nothing mysterious about it, it is the natural state.
What would you say the steps you took to get to this understanding or state? Well, I understand there's no, it's like a thorn removing a thorn kind of, to get to the divine puppet, as you call it. There must have been some kind of process, or something happened. Can you explain a bit more about that?
No, I think if I understood what you said right, I kind of got the impression you destroyed your own question halfway through it.
I just wanted to...
There's an appearance of stuff happening, and in this case, I was a devoted spiritual seeker. And then there's a kind of seeing, and it's realised none of that had any relevance.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just talking about the story, well then, in my case it was suffering. But I mean, it's really, you know, that's just, there's no moment in that or anything. There was a kind of, almost like a conscious surrender, and then what surrendered wasn't me doing it, if you know what I mean. But, so, I mean, that's quite a common story.
So was there any practical kind of mental steps and meditations that you went through to, or was it more of a natural kind of...
Not that it has anything to do with this, yes, in lots, and I feel like I want to throw in here that there is a very, very good book out there that I highly recommend to everybody about this particular character's spiritual path, and everybody who buys a copy of that book is basically essentially buying me a cup of coffee. So that's great, you know. But it's just this is the great cosmic joke. It's just ultimately seen to be irrelevant. You know, so for some characters there's that kind of story that I had, and for other characters there's boozing and going horse racing or whatever. And for either, awakening may or may not happen. It's such a mystery. It's mad.
I think the only glimpses you can guarantee, you know, it's not the same as an abiding state, but like with psychedelics, it's very often the case that people experience that, right? And retreats tend to give rise to that, but as for sort of ongoing, you know, when it's completely collapsed, it doesn't seem to be anything that can help with that, if you know what I mean. It happens to people in all different circumstances. They may have heard of this, they may not have heard of it. It's just, seems to be a lot of random to it. Except there are correlations with grief and suffering and waking up as well. But correlation does not imply, you know, doesn't causation, yeah, it's not necessarily.
I mean, in one of the most famous cases, there was a period of 2 years of profound depression beforehand. You know, and the mind might get hold of that and go, well, I've been pretty depressed, that's a good sign. No, it isn't. Because there's no perceivable, you can't transfer from one, I mean, I feel embarrassed using this phrase, but from one case to another case. Yeah. And go back also to, I mean, you know, in a way, think of your own past, sorry about the air quotations, but they're necessary. You know, and all of that, in a way, I think it can probably be seen quite easily by most apparent characters that that really did just happen. However much they might have felt that there was a causal entity here at the time. I'm going to get fed up with doing these air quotations, so are you, but, you know.
I think there's a, because in a way it's kind of a simple concept, there's a definite intellectual understanding. So I guess it's just to kind of allowing the awareness or whatever to kind of marinate that, and then that's what it feels like in a way.
Well, up to a point, Your Honour, but I think that, you know, the statement that you come across here and in other places, like there is nothing, this is just emptiness, it is absolute pure emptiness, but it's a very full emptiness. I don't think there's much the intellect can do with that. Other than go, what? What does that mean? Until it's seen, and then there's no need to ask the question.
So would you say there's any space for compassion for the apparent divine puppet? Because there's been a lot of suffering with my part. There's been paranoia and drug taking and lots of mental health issues, serious mental health issues. So what would you say would happen with that kind of case?
Well, I'm going to just throw in quickly, I'd say probably it's likely to be more compassion because the neurotic little self or divine puppet, you know, neurosis again is a great way of kind of cutting off compassion because, you know, I haven't got space for compassion for others, I'm so bound up in myself. So I'd say there may well be a tendency for there to be more natural compassion, I don't know, you know.
Yeah, there isn't the same judgment. There's that seeing the innocence of, you know, the history and what you've done and what you've been through. And there is this lot of love that tends to run through that, and things like failure and loss do not sting the way they did. It's just seen as like, you know, I don't know, it's, which is something you can work out in therapy as well, but this is, I suppose, just much more immediate, you know, just seeing that, because you weren't choosing it, you know, just seeing that aspect of it as well, that innocence of what happens. But it doesn't mean to say you won't have feeling around some of the stuff as well, because I can in the moment, and there's certain things in my past, I can think of one thing which I haven't forgiven and does still make me angry, but only if I talk about it, only why, you know, I don't talk about it very often. But so I'm not living from that, if you know what I mean. But which I quite like. It feels good to be alive with feeling, although I would say in my case there's a lot of neutral feeling. That a lot of the time it's very neutral and warm and intimate. It's not just a cold, you know. So, but yeah, we're really hard on ourselves. I think a lot of people struggle with that, don't they? But even regret can arise in the moment. It's just not, you know, you're not enmeshed in that, I suppose. You know. So, I mean, anything can.
I remember vividly once when at a Tony Gardner's meeting and somebody said, you know, is there less suffering when this is seen? He just said, no, more. Make of that what you will. I would just say, yeah, probably it's more intense but less long lasting.
For me, it was stepping into sanity. It was just, the bliss was so thick, there was no suffering. Even though I was in a bad situation, there wasn't any space for suffering. It was just, for quite a while, it was just very, very deep bliss. And there was no relief about that either, not in the normal sense, because it was just like different life. It was just normal somehow. But it's different in every case, it really is.
Is it correct to understand what you said earlier about no one is noticing, that so noticing also happens without a noticer? And when I try to not theorize about it and try to relate it to my experience. So when I experience emotions, I notice them, and when I realize that I'm noticing but there is no noticer, then that's the moment when I truly realize that that's the moment when the I disappears.
And when that happens, what's it like for you?
Well, it just happened when I took in what Richard said, and it was quite liberating. And also, at the same time, not at the same time, just a second after, it was scary.
Okay.
Scary, yeah.
What was scary about it is that I felt the truth of it in the moment, but in the next moment I got scared that will I be able to sustain that state?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously not, because now I'm already speaking.
Right. That's quite common. I think.
Yeah, you fall out of it, yeah.
I think a lot of people, after they wake up, worry about losing it initially, a wee bit, you know. Is it going to be there tomorrow morning?
But also thinking now, I mean, remembering when it was, the situation was completely untenable. And emotions reach so high, up to the highest degree on both ends, that it seems that the old skins of conditioning, because they all conditioned this or conditioned that, these old skins, they just broke up. And sometimes it's like that, the skins are too thick. And they're still there, but of course they were there. I mean, I remember that particular event, but it's of course not event, but it's just what it is. This freedom of from all this nonsense and joy of there isn't anything, neither this nor that. It's just a joy and people around and that, but that sometimes it's just the skin so thick through life. It
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
accumulates and becomes, as in certain situations, they come together and it's just completely untenable. You can't do anything about it. It just it's hopeless. And you lie at the bottom of the sea and all the sea is there and you're there and you can't do anything for yourself. It's just absolute hopeless case because it's just there. And then when it's sort of really at the bottom, suddenly something or somebody takes you up and it's not you, it's just this. It's probably we need something like that sometimes, like to wake up.
You know how locked in we are? Like when I experienced a heart opening, I don't know who, anyone here has experienced that, but I mean it really was like a gate. It felt like physically like this huge gate opening and just love pouring through. I mean that was just a few days before the awakening. But it was just like the relief, like whatever, you know, I'd been holding in, or just all that love underneath all this, you know, armour, you know, trying to survive life, pushing it away, and then suddenly, wow, it's just so much love. And
yeah, that's.
So, I was going to say, first of all, thank you for finding everything so relatable that you're saying, so helpful. So, I wanted to ask something, but I'll give some context first. Around 6 weeks ago after a retreat, there was something that changed, and after that everything's been much, much easier, I suppose. And much of what you've been describing I've been experiencing, meaning there's an insignificance to the story, and an emotion arises in a very powerful way and is felt and passes. And it's as if there isn't a storyteller to hold on to the emotion or to add more bulk to it. So I'm in a sort of period of integration, I would say, or something's going on where sometimes life is definitely much easier, but sometimes it distinctly feels like there isn't a me. And often there is a sort of level of appropriation or context being added. Does that make
Context being added?
story being
yeah.
reimposed? Yeah. And I suppose because it's initial, there's a meing and a being taking place. A sort of
was it during the retreat then?
immediately after.
Immediately after, just as you were leaving, sort of thing? Or?
On the train felt different. When I got home, immediate exhaustion for days and sweating, so it was a physical process, but at no point did it seem like there was a me that was imposing anything on what was happening. It was sort of fairly undeniable that something was changing, and there wasn't even a me to resist that or welcome it. So it was just something that was taking place. Along with that, I would say entire patterns have fallen away.
Right.
There isn't a person. Much of what you've described is very relatable. You know, suffering, intense suffering, narcissism you mentioned. There's been an opening where I'm experiencing love in a way that I never have before. Love, appreciation, connection. Authentic connection as well. A desire to be authentic and an ability to not hide behind layer and layer of, I don't know, patterns or things like that. But it was pronounced and undeniable what happened. It was quite clear.
Sounds good.
And it wasn't, what was clear was that I wasn't doing it. It was just energetic, or it was just happening.
There's a bit of a kind of hideous paradox that I think I feel quite embarrassed about, that, you know, speakers, I mean, I do this, I say this, I write this, I know other speakers do, you know, there's no cause and effect. You know, we can't, oh, you know, here's the recipe, this is what you do, da da da, and yet, mysteriously, nevertheless, you know, individuals, people go on retreats, and they go on retreats, and then there's this opening. Sometimes, you know, and it's kind of like, yeah, that does, yeah. Or sometimes somebody just reads a book, a sentence, not a book, sometimes just someone reads a sentence in a book, and bang, there's that opening. It's a complete mystery.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we can't work it out, but, you know, as I'm sure most of us in this room have heard said before, it's far worse than we can't work it out. You know, there is no one to work it out. But that doesn't stop the illusory me trying to work it out.
That's exactly where
Yeah.
I'm at, yeah. Sometimes the illusory me is trying to reimpose control.
Yeah, it
On
is.
it.
Yeah, it is about control. I've got, you know, this has happened and it kind of clearly hasn't happened for me. That's kind of in the realm of the bleeding obvious, and yet I have got to figure out what this thing is. That in spite of the fact that it didn't happen to me, kind of did happen for me. And so that's what I'm going to do for the next 20 years. Yeah.
I'm kind of glad I didn't have all this non-dual language around my head that happened to me, you know me. You know, it's because I suppose people get hung up on it a little bit at the time, and you get people who have had obvious awakenings. They're like, I think there's a me, you know, like really trying to work it out. And I guess we all do that to some extent, you know, when you sort of like, is this what they're talking about? But you know, I suppose after a while all that kind of drops away totally, because life is just, you know, it's intensely personal. It just, it's the same as it was. It's all about relationships and, you know, and things you want to do, the future. The past is still exciting. I mean, I'm glad that memory's there. I mean, there's nothing, the humanness itself is cool, you know, those aspects. In some ways it makes it, sometimes I think the non-duality thing makes it sound like that's something wrong with that, or it's not great, or, you know, the past. But it's rich. I mean, it's so rich. I think you appreciate it more in a way.
I'm finding things like continuity, causality, and time, they've all become questionable. And they certainly don't have the solidity that they had before. And the past doesn't have despite suffering, despite traumas, doesn't have any level of, any weight to it anymore.
Yeah, I quite like Buddhism. That's probably an incredibly heretical thing for me to say in here, and this will probably end my career such as it's been as a non-dual speaker. But I quite like Buddhism, and they talk a lot in Buddhism. There's a lot made of clinging, and without going into what, you know, clinging is, it's on, you know, on a kind of emotional level or whatever. There is definitely something about a release of clinging. So, for example, you know, the past, I mean, memory doesn't disappear, as I've said many a time. This is not the same as Alzheimer's, you know, but the kind of neurotic energy that's bound up, let's say, with the past stories, tends to dissipate, you know, and then the past can be visited, valued, enjoyed, in a way that it couldn't before, because it was too full, maybe, depending on the particular character, it was too full of guilt and pain and regret and anger and on and on and on. So there's a kind of, then there's a, it's not like, well, it's gone, it's disappeared, so there's a kind of freedom
Yeah.
to it.
And possibly, inevitably, when the past doesn't have, when one doesn't cling to the past, the seeking has diminished. Basically, I'm not really.
Yeah, yeah.
You
And
know,
vice
they're
versa.
linked, yeah, and vice versa.
Yeah.
You were talking about non-dual language. For years, the mind here was trying to, when I went to Tony's talks or yours or whatever, it wasn't until later, after a few seeings, should I say, that realisation that actually what this mind was doing here was turning some non-dual statements and things into some sort of poetic magic, imagining what it might be like. One of those in particular I remember was at one of Tony's talks, where he said that everything here is being seen, or being seen is being some sort of special entity that is seen. You know, and I realised sometime later, through I think one day just looking around at the traffic or something like that, you know, that he just meant it ordinary. Everything is being seen, that's the magic by itself. But when there's the ordinary, it seems like the ordinary person was seeing it, you know, like stood in here's me and I'm stood in a separate world kind of thing, you know, watching the traffic. There's no magic. But once it's seen that I'm going to use the word awareness, I don't care if the non-duality, please beat me up, I'm going to use the word awareness, I like that one. When awareness sees it, it's just extraordinary, wonderful, because just the fact everything is being seen, because it's being kind of seen in this kind of dream world kind of thing. But obviously this can get hurt, so that's tends to keep you humble, doesn't it? So I've used lots of very dualistic words there, but yeah, it was the way the mind plays, this mind here played tricks on turning non-dual language and Buddhist language into poetic stories, you know, and twisting it round, filtering it, you know.
It's so ordinary. I remember going to Tony's and Tony would say, you know, that carpet is oneness carpeting, and I'd be thinking, what is it that he sees that I don't? You know, and acid trips would come to mind. He must be able to see the atomic movement in the carpet and the various auric colours of the carpet and so forth. What is it? Of course, it's nothing to do with that at all. It's just the fact it's a perfectly ordinary carpet, but there's no one looking at it. That's the difference.
Doesn't that change like the visual field? So I have heard people say that like the visual field gets flattened somehow. So like our mind is trying to create, it's somehow creating 3D objects and objectifying everything. And once you're awake, you kind of see everything as just like almost like a painting. You see it sort of flattened in a, so your vision somehow changes maybe.
I've experienced that, like, but it's kind of contradictory, because so if I was looking at sky, it'd be so beautiful and so absorbing, like I'd just be, it would feel like looking at it was like taking drugs, but at the same time there was this kind of, you know, it's calmed down. I can still see what I see, I can still see the stillness and everything, but it was flatter as well, like an unreality to it, like, yeah, like not 3D somehow.
Yeah, I've had this in the book.
It's quite disturbing. No, it's not disturbing, but it's definitely noticeable. I think I've heard you talk about that as well.
Absolutely, and I'm going to in a minute as well.
Well, thank God. I mean, because everything's more beautiful and more alive, and it's kind of odd that it works like that, and also the flatness, yeah. But But it's very, very noticeable in nature, and definitely the sky stuff. It's
Here there was like I would say a period of time preceding actually the kind of full seeing, where absolutely everything just seemed two-dimensional. Absolutely, yeah, for quite a long time, and that brings to mind again, the Buddhist, well-known, Buddhist saying that I've quoted many at a time, first mountains are mountains. In other words, everything just seems ordinary. Then mountains are no longer mountains. In other words, everything is now seen to be utterly extraordinary, empty, two-dimensional, evanescent, just like a shimmering haze of light, you could say. And then, of course, finally mountains are simply mountains again, because the new becomes the everyday reality, if you like. So yeah, absolutely.
Is that why they, because I was always trying to understand what they meant by no space?
Right.
By, no, you say no time and no space.
Yeah, well, that's
I'm
easy.
thinking maybe, because I paint, so maybe if you flatten everything, somehow everything is immediate. I don't know if that's what you know how you speak about there being no time and space.
Yeah.
I thought maybe like visually I can kind of understand.
Which do you want to do first, time or space?
Space.
Take space, it's easier. Pick space. Go on. It's easier. Well, it's kind of so obvious and yet it's so impossible. It's frustrating, this communication. What creates space is the sense that there is an entity, I'll call it a person, divine puppet, whatever you want to say. There's an entity here. And because there's an entity here, everything else is outside it, so that's over there, so that creates space. If there's a complete dropping of any sense of me being located here, then there's no space, because there's no here and there, so everywhere's the same. Now, if that made sense to you, well, good luck. But if it's seen, it's seen. I mean, there's no way the words can get it, but if it's seen, it's seen.
I mean, I get, everything's immediate, and the idea of like a self is probably a perceptual filter that we're like filtering the world through. So I understand that if that would go, then it would just be more obvious. I don't know.
What more, do you mean sort of in the moment, more immediate, like everything experience? What do you mean?
Yeah, like the idea that there's a person here creates the idea that there's space between us, but in reality there's just like colour, like this. There's no difference. If I look at this as like a visual picture, there's just like higher, lower. I don't know. That's how my brain is abstracting it. And the space between us is something that my mind is just telling myself I'm here and you're there. But in reality, I can see that, like even visually, there's no dividing line.
Yeah, but
I don't know.
I mean, it's just experience, like it's ordinary now. Yes, you're I'm here, and like there's space. It's just that there's no one. I mean, that's all. And time is experience. It's experienced differently,
Okay.
but it's within the timeless. Like so. Meaning is created through time, isn't it? So we wouldn't be able to understand anything without it.
And I often say, that to say there's no time is both, incredibly challenging, but also in another sense absolutely in the realm of the bleeding obvious. That there's, you probably come across the phrase 1,000 times in this context. There's just this. What does that mean? Whatever's happening. Well, this. How long is this? How long is it? But it doesn't have any duration. How long is this? It's a second. Well, that's time, because there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to a second. No, it's just this. It doesn't have any time. And I feel like throwing in a Zen practice now. Go and sit in a park and watch a bird fly across the sky. And just allow yourself to gently ponder how that is completely impossible because there's no time. It can't happen, and yet it happens, and yet it's happening. And just ponder that for a little while, and then go and have a cup of tea. That's not really. I mean, it may be a Zen practice. I don't know. I just made it up, but you know, it's an interesting. You know, for the mind, that's an interesting. It may be. I'm rolling back on this now. It may be. Yeah, interesting. Spending the afternoon watching those birds, and it is impossible because there's no time, and yet it happens.
Time seems more like that makes sense to me.
Oh God, really? I always get a bit worried when things in here start making sense. This shouldn't be making sense.
I won't go on much more than this, but something maybe for your next book. And when you were talking about, you know, the secret of trying to sneak off to non-duality meetings or even talking about this.
I love it, yeah. I remember what you said, what you wrote, I love it.
Some years ago when I lived in Bakewell, I nearly got thrown out of a pub. I was warned just for mentioning that there was no time to a bunch of people. I was talking, these people knew me, you know, and Ron said, can you please not talk about this kind of thing? I mean, I wasn't talking about politics or religion or anything like that. I wasn't threatening anybody, and yet, you know, they were. I was warned.
Yeah, I still, even to this day, get emails from people sort of saying that they have great difficulty talking about this to their friends and da 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 da. I mean, usually my reply, I try to make it a bit kind of this, is, why the hell are you trying to talk about this to your friends? But that's an insane thing to do. I mean, I try and put it a bit more gently.
I know better now.
Yeah.
Pardon, I know better now.
Yeah.
Never talk about it.
And not even to family. Not even to family.
Well, if they're interested, yes, but
If they're
no, especially not
Especially
family.
not, yeah.
They're the worst.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
You know, they're the ones who've got access. You know, they know where you live.
Yeah.
Family, they can, you know, they can send a psychiatrist around. I mean, if they're interested, of course, if they're open, but then you'll feel that if they're open.
I brought it up the last time I was home and I found out my mum had a glimpse and I had no idea. Do you know, my dad's had it, my brother, you know, like just, I had a lot of people I talk to, they've experienced all sorts of
Things.
different experiences and glimpses, and I don't know, it's just by chance or you know, like lots of people, like, I'm not going to mention names, but if they go to doctors or blah blah blah, hairdresser, whatever, there's always someone who's like got something going on and really gets this, or I find it astonishing, you know. But that is my experience more often than not. So.
I think you can tell pretty quickly if somebody's open to this.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most terrifying things that a friend of mine can say to me is, I'm going to come to one of your talks, Richard. You know, and I know that there's no understanding or interest or openness really to it. They're just curious, and that is, no, please don't. Yeah. But where there's an openness, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And you do find it, well, you can find it in kind of unexpected places, well, unexpected people. Yeah.
I think you get a sense of some people as well. There's just something about them. They're, you know, some people just they're so authentic and they're so real, and you're connecting in a way. And it's like I'm always sort of curious then, you know, what goes on for them, or it's just, you know, I think you get a sense sometimes. But I always assume in a room full of non-dual, you know, like there's a few people who have had a glimpse. I mean, you tend to assume that now, I think.
What I found sorry, go on.
Oh, so quick one. Can you have, is it obvious when you say you have a glimpse, or
What
can it happen and you're not really obvious?
if you didn't have a context for it, or you'd never heard of it, you might just forget about it, that's the thing, or not see the significance of it. Not saying it's massive, but it might change your life to some extent. And I mean, I was just thinking of, some people are very skeptical of experiences or glimpses on, you know, on psychedelics say, but I had a glimpse when I was 18 on LSD, and I never thought about it afterwards because I didn't know what it was. But I'm glad I can go back to that and look at it now. But you know, because you lose the profundity of that, and
Yeah. And also you don't know what, I don't know what you're experiencing. You know what I mean? It's hard to know exactly. So just recently, it's a bit weird, but I was just sitting on my bed, like staring at like a roof for a long time.
Right.
And I was like, why am I staring at this roof? It's just a plain roof. It's not.
What, in a nice way, do you mean?
Yeah, I was
like,
just looking at this roof and I was like, it looked more vibrant and more beautiful. And like, this is weird.
oh, maybe the mind wasn't really there, was it? Was it kind of just...
Yeah, it wasn't really that. It was just like enjoying looking
Okay.
at a roof, at something I would have not enjoyed.
Okay.
In the past. And I was like, because I don't know exactly.
Very kind.
Because it wasn't particularly beautiful, but I imagine as an artist, do you not
Yeah.
find yourself doing
I
that?
do stare at things, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that is just a state of absorption or if that is what we're talking about.
But you didn't feel particularly... It didn't change your internal state, it wasn't like... Well, there must have been some... How long were you staring at? Have any idea? Any idea, or did you just lose sense of
I
time?
don't know, I just find myself staring up at random things a lot more.
Oh, right, okay. So
Like
fun to do.
recently, and like a bit more relaxation and kind of more of like intimacy with everything.
Oh,
I
right,
don't
okay.
know if that.
It's in the ballpark, isn't it?
Ballpark,
Maybe,
yeah.
yeah.
You know, it's hard to tell exactly what we're talking about.
Well, some people it tends to just sort of slide into it slowly. It might be that's going on, who knows? Or
But it
Yeah.
is obvious when this happens.
well, not for everyone. Some people
Yeah.
get confused. Some people have got really, minds full of doubt, and they're
Yeah.
in spite of. I mean, that can be in spite of the really deep awakening. It depends on the mind, but it often gives up after a while. Just. You know. But yeah, usually I think that's a lot of people get one-to-ones at that stage, or try to kind of figure out what's going on, or
Yeah.
clarify it maybe.
I mean, a lot of people have read the story of, what's her name, Suzanne Seagull, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, who had a long awakening, which was very traumatic from her account.
Full of fear,
Full of fear.
collision with the infinite.
Yeah, collision with the infinite, and seemingly in the story, was kind of maintained for a very long time, partly because she had no understanding of what was going on, and she didn't come across, not only did she not come across anybody else who had any understanding of it, but she came across lots of people that had very, very good advice, who had no understanding of what was going on whatsoever.
Oh, it's lots of therapists who told her she was
Yeah.
disassociated, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, quite a few.
Yeah. Another plug for the Buddhists there, it was then when she came across a Buddhist and shared with them that it fitted into place.
Was it John Klein she came across? I don't know.
I don't know.
I can't remember really.
But there was an interesting point that the therapist kept saying something about traumatic childhood,
Yeah,
and it turned out that she had repressed memories of that there was abuse that she had totally repressed and had no idea of. So I often think in her story, the therapists actually were onto something
yeah.
that was still present in terms of the me, but that was so out of conscious awareness, but it was having a traumatic impact.
Yeah.
That makes sense to the fear she was having, because it was huge and unremitting, wasn't it?
Yeah, and she had no context to put it in. But the therapist kept saying, "This sounds like
Yeah.
trauma, early trauma." She was, because she had the memory of it herself.
That question is this breakdown or breakthrough?
Yeah.
And of course,
Like both of them.
nowadays, these days, in the story it's much more likely that she would have come across a therapist who did have not just an understanding of this, but a direct seeing of it.
Yeah, it can be both. You're right. It can be both, and I've come across that as well. And it's good. She's an example of that, because I think a lot of therapists jump to the conclusion it's one of their
It's
like
only
just.
one, yeah, yeah.
Oh. But 10 years is a long time to waste, isn't it? I just know.
Horrendous for
Wow.
awful state. There was nothing she or anybody else. There was nobody. It wasn't that, you know, if there's no me that acting free will and choice, it's just what, I mean, it just didn't. But it was very prolonged, wasn't it, her suffering in that place of.
Do you know if it stopped? The fear stopped? I can't remember that in the book, whether the fear stopped afterwards.
Yeah.
Did it?
Did it?
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, after in my memory, which is which is, you know, even in ordinary terms, extremely deficient. I think she had this meeting with someone, you know, who had a Buddhist background, and put it into a context, and then she was, yeah, absolutely. And then it was after that she started, you know, doing this, giving talks and holding meetings. Yeah.
Died of a brain tumour.
And died of a brain tumour.
Just to make matters
Yeah.
worse. Like.
Doesn't necessarily happen to all non-dualities. Yeah. Yeah. There's I don't know if it exists anymore still, but there was a wonderful organisation. I can't quite. I think it may have been called spiritualcrisis.org, something like that. And they dealt very much in this, you know, this kind of edge between breakdown and breakthrough. And they had experts, and it was fronted. I can't remember her name. I was a wonderful elderly psychiatrist, you know, but really very, very open and very tough as well. Compassionate but tough. Yeah.
Do they still exist? Is it
I don't know.
What do you
The
call
only
it?
thing to do
Spiritual
would be
crisis?
to Google it.
Okay.
Spiritualcrisis.org, I think they're called. Yeah.
I think quite often it can appear that one is in a spiritual crisis, but I wouldn't necessarily give it that name when there's a seeing of something or an awakening or
Yeah.
whatever, or a dropping away. There can be times where
Yeah.
it can seem like a crisis.
And sometimes it's genuinely psychosis. And it's quite useful if you can somehow, it's quite good for the character of the person if somehow that can be sorted out or differentiated. Yeah, it's not great being in a state of psychosis.
Psychosis can be a major, major opening.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah, it
major.
can go together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you were saying about mountains becoming extraordinary, I think you said that. First there's
mountains are mountains, then mountains are not mountains, then mountains are mountains again.
When mountains are
Same
not
same.
mountains, did you mean they don't exist or they
No.
become something else altogether?
Yes, but no, neither. They just seem as extraordinary rather than ordinary.
Yeah.
And the closest I can get to it, I mean, you know, talking from this character, was that there's a period, a paratype, where everything was just like two-dimensional, almost like, I would say, like, you know, like painted on a theatrical backdrop, that seems to have three-dimensionality when you sit in the stalls and it's lit properly, but of course if you actually see it as it actually is, it's just a two-dimensional painting, it's just a two-dimensional backdrop. That's the closest I can get to describing it.
'Cause
And of course again, it has no importance whatsoever, it's just a phenomenon.
Mm.
But it's kind of interesting.
I've been noticing that everything has for many months, even before whatever happened several weeks ago, everything's got an aliveness, like buildings, bricks, roofs, nature, but everything sometimes has an aliveness that just wasn't there before.
Yeah.
Everything was mundane and ordinary, seen through the filter of me. Now, and at certain times it's been sort of mind-blowing, it's been so bright, everything is alive.
Sure. I think
Beauty,
trees are the
colour.
best when it comes to
Trees, yeah.
walking
Trees,
around
grass,
trees when you're in
parks,
that. Like,
yeah.
it's yes.
One can sit in the garden and just be lost, or even look at a building and just look and look and look, a bit like what you were saying, yeah?
Yeah. And the perfection as well. So
Yeah.
just everything is just perfect.
Then even television, if it's a HD television, it can be, whoa, sort of
All right.
As though you've taken something.
Oh really? I never did that.
Uh-huh.
I hate television, so I just...
Even YouTube and.
Oh, I do
reality?
watch YouTube, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
Get a pot plant and put it where your television used to be.
No, I actually never watch television, just YouTube
Right,
on
okay.
the television.
Yeah.
I was going to say, how much do you think human relationships play a part in the awakening, whatever you want to call it? I find when I meet people, it kind of fast forwards things, because I spend a lot of time on my own, so, and then when I meet people, it feels like things have kind of, I understand things a lot more. It's kind of like a speeding up of understanding.
Speeding up of understanding? What do you mean, like when you're meeting
But
up
the
with...
penny drops a bit more on
Is
a
it...
bit more in connection with people. It feels like I'm not just bouncing around in my head kind of thing.
You're more in your body then, when you're kind of relating and
Yeah, it's
feeling more
connection.
grounded and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Might make some sort of sense, but...
I think we're kind of going suspiciously into the realm of cause and effect here. I mean, I can remember a kind of period of growing intensity about this. You know, nothing had happened, just growing and growing intensity. And quite a long period of wondering about, you know, what the hell is this about? There's something hidden just behind what I can see. What the hell is it and how can I see it? And that actually involved a lot of aloneness, because that's when that process, which I'm not saying it was important, it was just something that was happening, that's when that process, you know, was ongoing. And then being with people would kind of bring me out of that.
But you're talking about understanding it, aren't you? Just sort of
Just
understand on a cerebral level, or...
What you just said about it feels like, yeah, there's a lot going over things in my head, like I doesn't exist kind of thing, and meditating on those sayings. And then when I go and meet people, just normal people, and connect with them, feels like everything just kind of drops into place a bit more.
In a physical sense then? Like...
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, feeling. And
But just feeling more connected in general, rather than, you know...
yeah, and also like understanding things kind of fall into place in my head. And less confusion, I guess.
Okay.
Because I've read that you can't really become realised on your own. It takes relationships.
Oh.
I don't... Yeah, that's not...
I nearly swore then.
Was that Jiddu Krishnamurti? What do you think?
I think so, yeah. Something
Yeah,
like
okay,
yeah.
so that... I don't see what he was... I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
No.
Like, but-
Am I allowed to say bollocks in here? I'm not sure. Anyway, if I'm allowed to say it, I've said it. If I'm not allowed to say it, I didn't say it. I mean, you know, come on. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to this. There's no rules. There's no, you know. Well, it can't possibly happen unless you're... No.
Well, change happens through relationship, normal change. I mean, there's very... You can sit and you can analyse yourself to death.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Okay,
I
so yeah.
spent like basically 4 years in my room at my parents' house, didn't leave. So I spent a lot of time, extreme amount of time on my own. So, not like normal relationships, I mean like just connecting with people day to day, not like having relationships, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because you're cutting off your emotions that way. It strips you bare, isolation.
Yeah.
And and just being around people, you know, it changes you. There's an alchemical process that goes on there when you're around people. If you're around healthy people, you're going to start to internalize that, aren't you? And it will definitely change comes. Definitely doesn't come on your own. I suppose that's why a lot of people they spend years in an ashram or something, or cut off on their own in a cave, and they think that they're really healthy, but then they come back and try to relate and they can't because.
Yeah.
I mean, they think they've got it, but actually, relationships, you rub up against people, so you find out what's there. If there's issues there, you start to see everything, don't you? And that it's healing. You can't heal on your own. I don't believe you can.
Yeah, that's
You know,
right.
you can do bits and pieces. I wouldn't say totally futile. You can do bits and pieces, but real change, real healing, you do need others. Like, I guess you.
But I mean, any injunction, I'd be wary of any injunction about this. I mean, for every spiritual teacher or whatever who says you've got to want this more than life itself, there'll be others who say you have to give up wanting this entirely to have it. It's just more ideas. But then there is this thing also. I mean, in terms of normal human relationships, Ram Dass is very good on this. Where we spend maybe a long and intense period of time, up the mountain, whether literally up the mountain or not, but sitting at the feet of the guru and kind of intensely meditating and blah, blah, blah. Again, whether literally or not, and perhaps I'm trapped by language, so I'm just going to ignore the rules and say achieving some kind of very open state and then coming down from the mountain. In other words, going back into normal life and everything absolutely falls apart. In some way or other. I mean, in Ram Dass's case, actually, it wasn't that everything fell apart. He came back down from the mountain and went back to wherever it was in America. I think it was San Francisco within sort of 3 or 5, I don't know whether it was 3 or 4 minutes or 3 or 4 days or weeks, had sort of fallen in love with virtually every woman that he saw on the street because he was in such an open space, sort of collected a small harem of, devoted. And then he kind of realised this is not necessarily the best way to enact divine love on the streets of San Francisco, so he then kind of went in a different direction. But there's all sorts of stories. I think, God, what's that guy that wrote Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist? It doesn't matter, but I think he writes about this as well, the difficulties of kind of coming down from the mountain and then trying to reintegrate with normal life.
Yeah.
But he eloped with a nun, so I mean his case was rather special. He ran off with a nun, didn't he? The guy that wrote Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist.
I sometimes find it a bit difficult to relate to people. Like if someone's telling a story and they're using I and me a lot, because it seems like it's not relevant, because there's no reality there from what I've understood. So, but I guess that will, you said that there's a lot of love that comes up, so I am noticing that naturally comes up more and more.
Yeah, you'll start to drop that as well, because I use I all the time. I mean, and it's quite irritating when people don't but yeah, I think a lot of this stuff just falls away, after awakening. It's just, language is just kind of normal. It's just,
The man to talk to about that is the man sitting next to you, Jason, because he's really good on the advice of police.
Not really.
Who come along and arrest you for using personal pronouns.
I don't quite know where the Brighton police idea came from. Sort of bunch of thought police who go to non-duality meetings and pick up on the language and crucify anybody that uses the word me.
Yeah.
I have a question about fear and crisis, which have been mentioned. So, I don't know. I feel like it's been happening for a while. That there's moments where it feels like this sense of identity is questioned, and sometimes there's a strong emotional reaction to that, and it can be very scary, and then it can lead me to want to run away from it and avoid it as much as possible. And then there's this pull towards it that makes me calm at these kind of things. And yeah, it feels like a pattern that's repeated itself for some years now, so I feel a bit stuck with this kind of thing.
Oh right, so all the emotions coming up, sort of thing.
Yeah,
Like,
just the sense of this fear and like this like identity being questioned. This sometimes, I mean, maybe these are just ghosts that the mind is making up, but it feels like it's gonna break any moment. You know, like it feels like this identity will break any second, and that generates a lot of fear somehow.
are you doing any practices like meditation or talking to anyone or?
Yeah, so I mean, I was doing meditation before this started happening, and I am redoing it now again. But
does it make it worse or better?
No,
Do you know,
I mean,
like?
it feels. It doesn't really feel like it has much of a. I mean, it makes me feel happier in my life, and like it makes maybe like helps have a like good attitude towards fear and like just feeling fear, let it wash away, and yeah, I mean these things can help, but like the meditation itself is not where these things come up.
Oh yeah, I would have thought so. But so it sounds like you've got trauma coming up,
Yeah.
and mixed in with everything.
Right.
Possibly.
No, indeed. I mean, you mentioned psychedelics, and I have had like a few experiences that. I mean, at the time I didn't call them trauma, but like more time passed, the more I like started using that word a bit more. Cause it felt like
What negative experiences then?
that's not what they felt like at
Uh-huh.
the time, but they definitely feel very connected to this fear that I'm talking about. Like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, moments where in psychedelic trip maybe I had this dissolution of identity, and then now it feels like, oh, this is going to happen and it's gonna stay forever, you know, and that brings up fear.
Mm-hmm.
The fear of that it's going to be like that forever, like nothing that
that's just this person will die and then there's no way to save it and it's never gonna be coming back, and like something is about to happen that's irreversible.
Right. Okay. Oh. Yeah. Okay. Are you scared of the psychedelics now then?
I don't. I mean, I have done them again at times afterwards, but more like, I don't know. I mean, either with the intention of more like therapy, or just like to have that little bit of facing this thing, just like facing the trauma, but definitely not like plunging into it. Yeah. No, I don't feel like. The opposite of the desire to do that. Yeah.
There's also, you could do therapy as well.
Sure.
I don't know. Well, whatever else I don't know what other grounding techniques you've got, or.
Yeah, I do therapy. It's kind of, I feel like it's hard to talk about this in therapy.
So your therapist doesn't get it,
No.
or.
Yeah.
You should get a transpersonal one at least.
Yeah.
Somebody who's maybe. Well, I'm not saying maybe you've got a good relationship with your therapist, and that's.
I do like
great.
it for other areas of my life. It helps a lot, I would say. But yeah, I don't know.
Does she know? Have you tried to describe what's going on?
Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, she reacted in this like. You know, she I don't know how she reacted, but I felt sort of not too safe sharing it, so I just didn't talk about it anymore after that. I just like left it to the side in a corner. Yeah.
Okay, because I mean, some therapists can get it if you say something like Eckhart Tolle or something a little bit more mainstream, and they might kind of. But I don't know. It sounds like your instinct is not to go there in that case, but maybe not.
Do you meditate a lot? Long periods?
No, I mean once a day, 10 minutes, something like this. Yeah.
Yeah, because meditation can bring up a lot of stuff as well, and the standard advice is always to sort of meditate less, if that's the case, but 10 minutes, yeah.
Right, and it really doesn't feel like that's where it's coming from.
Right.
Yeah, it's more like, I don't know, I guess self-inquiry, that's the word that I learned. So yeah, if I start feeling, okay, sense of identity and just like observing that a bit, that kind of thing can lead to fear, yeah.
You ever experienced that fear before, like years ago, or?
I mean, I feel like it started from the 1 or 2 psychedelic experiences, plus that happened to be the time that I learned about non-duality first. I was more like doing meditation and Buddhism before, so it just all the words came together at the right time, and it just created this,
sounds wrong. It all sounds wrong. Yeah, I mean, fear is common, like, but it sounds like you're getting a lot of it. So.
I think I may have already said this afternoon, you know, it's a kind of fairly obvious thing that, you know, I think it is beneficial if you're seeing a therapist that it's a therapist who isn't there. You know, in other words, a therapist who's seen that they're not a person.
Sure.
You know.